My name is Margaret Maggie Wallace, and I'm 67 years old. Most folks in our part of Arizona just call me Maggie. These days, my life looks quiet from the outside. Morning walks through the desert trails evenings with a pot of chamomile tea, and Sundays spent at St. John's Methodist Church, greeting the same neighbors I've known for decades. But behind that quiet routine is a lifetime of hard work, resilience, and more than a few battles that shaped who I am. Before we dive into true revenge stories, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. I live alone now in a 2-story Adobe-style home just outside Scottsdale. My husband Thomas passed away nearly 12 years ago. He was a Vietnam veteran, strong in spirit, but weakened by illness toward the end. When he died, my world felt small, as if the colors had been drained out of it. The house was too quiet, the days too long. I had a choice. Then fade into grief or build something new. I chose the latter. You see, I had always loved the world of hospitality. While Thomas was alive, we managed a modest roadside inn together, 30 rooms, a diner attached, the kind of place truck drivers and traveling families remembered fondly. After his passing, I poured myself into expanding what we had started. I bought properties when the markets dipped refurbished old motels into boutique stays and gradually built Wallace Hospitality Group, a name that carries weight now in the Southwest. At 67, I don't need to prove myself anymore. My portfolio includes hotels, event venues, and even a small chain of catering companies. I don't flaunt it. I'm not the type to walk into a family dinner bragging about quarterly reports. But I've earned respect in boardrooms, and people in the industry know I keep my word. That quiet strength is my armor. Still, in family circles, that part of me often disappears. When I sit at my brother-in-law's table or attend holiday gatherings, I'm not Margaret Wallace, business owner. I'm just Maggie the widow who helps with events sometimes. They smile politely when I talk, then quickly shift the conversation to someone else. I've learned to let it slide because peace is easier than pride. But deep down, a sting always lingers. That autumn morning, life felt steady, almost ordinary. The sun had risen over the Sonoran Desert with its usual golden blaze, painting the mountains in shades of copper and rose. I sipped coffee from a chipped mug that had survived 3 house moves, flipping through a stack of industry journals. Numbers forecasts, new competitors. All of it still fascinated me. Even after decades, I felt alive when studying trends and imagining what could come next. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Hannah, had sent over my schedule a call with potential investors in Nevada, a lunch meeting with city officials about zoning laws, and an evening walkthrough at one of our resorts preparing for a corporate retreat. Busy, yes, but fulfilling. These were the rhythms that kept me moving forward after loss. As I glanced at the framed photos lining my office shelf, I paused on one in particular. Thomas and I on the porch of that very first inn. He was in jeans and a worn flannel shirt, holding up a grand opening banner, while I stood beside him with flour on my hands from cooking pies for the guests. That picture reminded me why I had kept going. We had built something with love, and I carried that torch even after he was gone. What I didn't know then was that my so-called quiet season was about to shatter. I had weathered storms before, financial downturns, the loss of my partner, even betrayals in business. But the storm heading my way was different. This one would come not from strangers or markets, but from the people I considered family. For now, though, I allowed myself the comfort of routine. I straightened my navy blazer, tucked the photo back into its place, and stepped out onto my balcony. From 30 floors up, Phoenix buzzed with energy traffic, humming sunlight, glinting off glass towers, a city alive with ambition. I smiled, unaware that the next phone call I answered would change everything I thought I knew about loyalty, love, and the limits of forgiveness. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. 2 weeks later, on a crisp Sunday evening, I found myself seated at my brother-in-law's long oak dining table. Robert, my late husband's younger brother, had invited the family for what he called a special announcement. In the Wallace family, that usually meant one of 2 things: somebody was moving or somebody was getting married. The house was full of chatter, clinking dishes, and the familiar smell of roast beef slow-cooked with onions and carrots. Robert's wife Linda had gone all out with mashed potatoes rolls, still warm from the oven, and a lemon meringue pie cooling on the counter. I had been part of this family for over 40 years, through births, graduations, and more Thanksgivings than I could count. Yet sitting there, I still often felt like the outsider. "All right, everyone," Robert said, standing up at the head of the table, his cheeks flushed with excitement. "Daniel has something to share." All eyes turned to Daniel, his youngest brother. At 35, Daniel was a soft-spoken architect who carried the same quiet determination Thomas once had. He reached for Laura's hand, his fiancée, who sat beside him, her smile both nervous and radiant. "We're engaged," Daniel announced, lifting Laura's hand so everyone could see the modest diamond ring glinting in the light. The table erupted in cheers. Linda clapped her hands together. Robert gave a hearty laugh, and even the teenagers at the far end of the table put down their phones long enough to applaud. I smiled genuinely. Daniel deserved happiness, and Laura struck me as a kind-hearted woman who had stuck by him through lean times. But as the initial wave of excitement faded, another familiar tension filled the room. Money. "You know we'll have to keep things simple," Robert said almost immediately, shifting the conversation from love to logistics. "Weddings cost a fortune these days." Laura lowered her eyes. "We've been saving, but between my student loans and the house payments—" Her voice trailed off. Daniel squeezed her hand. "We'll figure it out. We don't need anything fancy. Just a day to celebrate with family." Linda shook her head. No, every bride deserves her special day. We can't have folding chairs in a church basement. That's not right." I sat quietly listening as the family tossed around ideas. Potluck reception, renting the community center, buying a dress off the clearance rack at a discount bridal shop. Every suggestion carried the same undertone: compromise, settle, accept less than what they truly wanted. Inside my mind began calculating. I knew the exact cost of venues across Phoenix, the price of catering for $50 versus $100, the seasonal discounts hotels offered for block bookings. Numbers flowed through my head like second nature. To me, arranging a wedding wasn't an impossible dream. It was a puzzle I had solved 100 times for clients and friends. But no one asked me. Robert glanced my way, once then quickly turned back to Daniel. "Maybe we can talk to a cousin about using his backyard. That would save some money." I stirred sugar into my coffee, choosing silence over interruption. In this family, I had learned long ago that offering too much would be seen as showing off. Better to wait, observe, and let the moment ripen. After dinner, as plates were cleared and the younger folks drifted toward the television, Laura lingered in the kitchen with me. Her eyes were glassy and her voice trembled as she whispered, "Maggie, do you know anyone in the industry who might be willing to donate a service or two? Maybe flowers or a photographer? I hate to ask, but we don't know what else to do." I set down my coffee cup and took her hand. It was small, soft, with the same nervous energy I had once carried when Thomas and I started our life together. "Laura," I said gently, "you let me worry about this. I'll help." Quietly, no fuss. Her relief was immediate, tears brimming in her eyes. She hugged me tightly, whispering thank you over and over. I didn't mention numbers, nor did I explain the reach of Wallace hospitality. I simply promised myself that Daniel and Laura would have the day they dreamed of. If that meant I wrote a check called "In Favors" or moved mountains, so be it. For me, it wasn't about recognition, it was about family and giving them the start they deserved. What I couldn't know then was that my kindness offered in confidence and love would become the very weapon used against me. By keeping my gift anonymous, I was handing others the opportunity to twist it to erase me while keeping my generosity intact. That night, as I drove home under the desert sky, I felt peaceful. Helping them felt right. But in hindsight, that was the moment the seed of betrayal was planted, even if I couldn't yet see it growing. The night after that family dinner, I sat in my study with the lights dimmed low, listening to the faint hum of desert crickets outside my window. The conversation replayed in my mind, Laura's trembling voice, Robert's practical suggestions, Daniel's quiet determination to make do. I knew that tone. It was the same one Thomas and I had once carried, stretching every dollar trying to create something meaningful on a shoestring. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the framed photos of my properties across Arizona and Nevada. Hotels with polished marble lobbies, event centers with soaring ceilings and panoramic desert views, restaurants where I'd shaken hands with governors and CEOs. All of it had been built from long nights' risky loans and decisions that nearly broke me more than once. To Daniel and Laura, a dream wedding felt out of reach. To me, it was just a matter of signing a few papers. I opened a drawer and pulled out my checkbook, the old-fashioned kind I still kept, even though most things were electronic now. The pen hovered for a moment as I considered the amount. $35,000 would more than cover it: venue catering, flowers, photographer, hotel rooms for out-of-town guests. For Wallace Hospitality, that was less than 2 days of profit. For Daniel and Laura, it would feel like a miracle. But I also knew this family. If I marched back into Robert's dining room and announced my contribution, it would turn into a circus. Whispers of showing off, side comments about buying affection. And worse, Laura would feel indebted, as though her special day carried a price tag with my name attached. No, this had to be anonymous. The next morning, I met with Hannah, my assistant, in the office downtown. She was used to my quiet projects, the kind that didn't make headlines but mattered to me personally. "Hannah," I said, sliding the check across my desk, "I want this processed through our charitable account. Allocate it toward the Sunset Ridge Estate, Desert Bloom Catering, and the Desert Palms Resort, all under a single client code, no direct references to me." She raised an eyebrow, but her voice remained professional. "Wedding package?" "Yes. Daniel Wallace and Laura Bennett. But it must look like a third-party contribution. Discretion matters here." Hannah smiled knowingly. "Understood." By lunchtime, the wheels were already turning. Contracts were adjusted, vendors notified, reservations blocked. In 48 hours, Daniel and Laura would be holding confirmations for a wedding they hadn't dared to imagine. That evening, Laura called me, her voice trembling with gratitude. "Maggie." I don't know how, but doors keep opening. Sunset Ridge confirmed availability, and the caterer said everything's handled. "Did you—" I cut her off gently. "Sometimes blessings come when you least expect them. Just focus on enjoying your engagement, Laura." She cried softly, thanking me without truly knowing the scope of what had happened, and I foolishly perhaps felt warmed by the secrecy. There was a certain joy in giving without applause, in knowing that I had lifted a burden without anyone needing to sing my praises. That night I poured myself a glass of Merlot and stood on the balcony overlooking Phoenix. The city lights stretched endlessly, blinking like a sea of promises. I thought of Thomas, of how proud he would be to see me carry on, not just building an empire, but using it to create joy for others. What I didn't realize was how vulnerable that anonymity made me. By removing my name, I removed my protection. The money could be claimed, twisted, reshaped into someone else's narrative. I had given Daniel and Laura their dream, but in doing so, I had handed someone else the keys to erase me entirely. For the moment, though, I let myself believe I'd done the right thing. In my heart, I thought family loyalty would guard the truth. What I couldn't yet see was how fragile that loyalty really was, and how quickly generosity could turn into the very weapon of my undoing. It was a Wednesday morning when the call came through. I had just finished reviewing contracts for a new resort in Nevada, my coffee still warm on the desk, when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have let it roll to voicemail, but something in me decided to pick up. Mrs. Wallace. The voice on the other end was female-clipped and professional. "This is Angela from Sunset Ridge Estate. I'm calling to confirm the final details for the Wallace-Bennett wedding." I smiled faintly. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. "Yes, Angela, thank you for the call." But before I could ask about details, her voice shifted. "We've had conflicting instructions. Yesterday we received a call from your husband, Robert. He said you would no longer be attending the event. However, he also requested that the financial arrangements remain unchanged." I froze my pen halfway across a page. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "Your husband informed us that you wouldn't be present," Angela repeated carefully, "but he was very clear that the funds you provided should stay allocated. Venue catering accommodations all confirmed as originally planned." I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight. The morning sunlight, which had felt bright and energizing moments before, now seemed harsh, glaring across the polished wood of my office. Robert had uninvited me to my own brother-in-law's wedding, and he thought he could keep my money in the process. My grip tightened on the phone. So let me understand this correctly. He canceled my attendance, but not my check. Angela hesitated, the discomfort palpable even through the line. That's correct, ma'am. In 15 years of event planning, I've never encountered a situation quite like this. A silence stretched between us, filled only by the faint hum of traffic 30 floors below my office window. My mind raced, connecting dots I had ignored, the side glances at family dinners, the way my offers of help were brushed aside, Robert's subtle digs about me being too busy with work. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. Thank you, Angela, I finally said, forcing my voice into the calm, steady tone I used in boardroom negotiations. I appreciate you bringing this directly to me. I will handle the matter with my husband. We ended the call, and I sat motionless, staring out at the Phoenix skyline. The city bustled, oblivious to the fact that my world had just shifted on its axis. I thought about Thomas, how he had always seen me as his partner, how he had valued my strength instead of resenting it. And I wondered not for the first time what had happened to Robert to turn him into a man who could betray so casually. On my desk lay the financial reports for Wallace Hospitality, profits higher than ever, expansion plans in motion, a reputation built over decades of work. Yet the man who shared my home still introduced me as Maggie, who helps out with some events, still treated me like a convenient checkbook rather than a partner. And now he had tried to erase me entirely. My intercom buzzed. Mrs. Wallace. Hannah's voice came through. You have another call, Diane, from Desert Bloom Catering. She says it's urgent. I exhaled slowly. 2 calls in 10 minutes, both about the same wedding. This wasn't coincidence. I pressed the flashing button. This is Margaret Wallace speaking. Mrs. Wallace. Diane began, her tone strained with the kind of tension only family drama creates. We received instructions yesterday that conflict with our contracts. Your husband requested we remove your name from all guest lists, seating charts, and communication, but to maintain all financial arrangements as before. My pulse quickened, though I kept my voice even. Did he say these changes were made with my consent? A pause. Then, yes. He presented it as a mutual family decision. That raised some red flags for us, which is why I wanted to confirm directly. There it was, the lie laid bare. Robert hadn't just erased me. He had done it by pretending I agreed to my own disappearance. The betrayal cut sharper than I could have imagined. This wasn't about avoiding family drama. It was about control, about diminishing me so completely that I became invisible except for the money he intended to keep. As I ended the second call, my hand shook slightly for the first time in years. Not from fear, but from clarity. The mask had slipped. Robert had revealed himself, and now I knew the truth. My generosity had become his weapon. And I was done being erased. That night I couldn't sleep. The desert wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the dry scent of mesquite, but my mind was far noisier. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, its slow rotation matching the rhythm of memories replaying in my head. Every glance, every offhand comment from Robert's family suddenly sharpened with new meaning. I remembered Thanksgiving just 3 weeks earlier. Daniel had raised his glass, thanking everyone for standing by him during difficult times. Robert had clapped him on the back, adding, "Family is about sacrifice. We all chip in where we can." At the time, I thought nothing of it. But now it sounded like foreshadowing a test balloon floated into the air. Then there was the dinner, when Laura confessed through tears that they could only manage maybe $5,000 for a wedding. Robert had nodded solemnly, then turned toward me with a look that carried weight. Not a request, not even a plea, an expectation. As if my checkbook were part of the family inheritance, something to be tapped at will. I sat up, swung my legs over the bed, and pulled my robe tighter around me. My home office glowed faintly from the streetlight outside, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk. I walked in, switched on the lamp, and stared at the neat stack of financial reports. Morrison, no Wallace hospitality had revenues that made industry veterans envious. And yet, in my own family, I was Maggie who helps with events. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand steady now. With each memory, the fog cleared. Robert had been laying the groundwork for weeks. Casual comments about too many personalities at weddings, subtle digs about how I worked too much, how I was emotional at family gatherings. Slowly, he had been painting me as a liability, someone to be excluded for the sake of harmony, and I had given him the perfect opening. By insisting my contribution remain anonymous, I had erased myself from the financial narrative. The money was there, the contract signed, but my name was absent. All Robert had to do was step in and claim the authority. The betrayal was calculated, not impulsive. He hadn't made a rash decision in anger. He had orchestrated my absence like a business deal, remove the inconvenient spouse, keep the financial benefit, move forward without accountability. I pulled open a drawer and retrieved a small leather-bound journal. It wasn't for appointments or budgets, but for reflection, something Thomas had encouraged me to keep after his diagnosis. I flipped to a blank page and began to write. Robert erased me from Daniel's wedding. He lied to vendors claiming I agreed. He kept the money knowing I would not make a scene. This isn't about family harmony, it's about control. The words steadied me. Written truth has a way of cutting through emotional fog. My phone buzzed again, another text from Robert. "Stop making this dramatic, we'll talk when you calm down." I stared at the screen, the word dramatic burning hotter than the Arizona sun at noon. That single word revealed everything he didn't see me as a partner, an equal, or even a person wronged. To him, I was an emotional woman, throwing a tantrum easily dismissed. I set the phone face down on the desk. For years, I had chosen silence in the name of peace. I had swallowed dismissive comments, endured invisibility at family gatherings, let others take credit for the very networks I built. But silence had become permission, and permission had become erasure. Not anymore. As the clock ticked past midnight, a calm resolve settled over me. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was systemic, woven into years of being underestimated. Robert's family had mistaken kindness for weakness, patience for passivity. They thought they could erase me, cash my check, and carry on without consequence. But they had forgotten one thing. Every venue, every caterer, every hotel room tied to that wedding belonged directly or indirectly to me, and I was about to remind them exactly who I was. The next morning began with another ring of my office phone. Hannah, my assistant, peeked her head through the door with a look I had come to recognize, half curiosity, half alarm. "It's Copper Mesa Catering," she said softly. "They insist it's urgent." I motioned for her to patch it through. "Mrs. Wallace," a man's voice began professional but uneasy. "We received instructions yesterday to modify the wedding menu. The caller, your husband, told us you had stepped back from planning, but that the billing arrangements remain the same. We thought it best to verify with you directly, as this seemed unusual." My chest tightened. Another lie layered neatly on top of the first. "Thank you for confirming," I replied evenly. "For now, please make no changes until you hear from me." We ended the call, but the phone barely had time to rest in its cradle before it rang again. This time, it was Desert Palms Resort, the hotel where 60 rooms had been blocked off. Mrs. Wallace, the reservations manager, said, her voice strained, "We were instructed to reassign the primary contact for the Wallace-Bennett wedding. The caller said you were no longer involved, but that all deposits should remain intact. I want to be clear, this doesn't align with our standard procedures. May I ask if you did in fact approve this?" I closed my eyes for a moment. The pattern was undeniable now. "No," I said firmly. "I did not. Please consider any such instructions void." By mid-morning, I had fielded half a dozen similar calls. Florists, musicians, even the photographer. All told the same story. My husband, or someone speaking on his behalf, had contacted them, insisting that I was out, but my money was in. The betrayal was no longer private. It was broadcast across the entire wedding network, whispered between vendors carried with each uneasy phone call. Even strangers recognized the absurdity of excluding the person funding the event. And then came the personal calls. First, it was Linda, my sister-in-law. Her voice carried the polished calm of someone rehearsing lines. "Maggie, you know how stressful weddings can be. Robert thought it best if you didn't have to deal with all the chaos. He only wanted to protect you." I let the silence stretch long enough for her confidence to crack. "Protect me by removing my name from guest lists. Protect me by lying to vendors." Her sigh was heavy. "Sometimes family has to make difficult choices for the greater good. I hope you can understand that." Before I could respond, the call waiting beeped. It was Daniel. For a fleeting second, I hoped he was calling to apologize to clear the air. "Aunt Maggie," he began, his tone careful, almost scripted. "I just want to thank you for your generosity. The wedding is shaping up beautifully, and Laura and I couldn't be more grateful. As for the guest list, well, we're trying to keep things small, intimate. I hope you understand." Understand. That word again. As though my exclusion were a rational adjustment, not a betrayal. "Daniel," I said quietly, "do you realize I found out from vendors that I wasn't invited? Not from you, not from Robert, from strangers." A pause, then a hollow laugh. "It wasn't meant to hurt you. We just wanted peace. You know how strong personalities can complicate family gatherings." Strong personalities. That was the label now. My presence reduced to a complication. By afternoon, even Laura called. Her voice carried the syrupy tone of someone trying to mask discomfort with sweetness. "Maggie, I just want to say how much we appreciate you putting family first. By stepping aside, you've shown what kind of person you are, selfless, gracious. Frankly, I think this will make the day even more special." It was almost impressive, the coordinated script, each family member playing their role, reshaping betrayal into benevolence. My erasure was now framed as generosity, my silence recast as grace. But beneath the honeyed words, I heard the truth. They believed they had me cornered, that I would accept invisibility so long as the checks cleared and the wedding proceeded. They didn't yet understand. By evening, I set the phone on silent, unable to stomach another call. I poured myself tea, sat at the kitchen table, and allowed the quiet to settle. The day's events had confirmed what I suspected. This wasn't Robert acting alone. It was systematic, planned, executed with chilling efficiency. But what they underestimated was simple. They thought they had stripped me of power. In reality, they had handed me proof call after call, word after word, each one stitching together a tapestry of deceit. And I was about to use that tapestry to unravel everything they thought they controlled. It was nearly dusk when Robert finally came home. I heard the garage door rumble open, then slam shut. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, fast, heavy, the gait of a man rehearsing his defense. "Maggie," he called, his voice tight with irritation. "We need to talk." I stayed at the kitchen table sipping tea, refusing to stand. Let him walk into my silence. He appeared in the doorway, still in his work suit, tie pulled loose. His face was flushed, his eyes hard. He dropped his briefcase onto the counter with a thud that made the coffee mugs rattle. "I hope you're satisfied with the chaos you've created," he said, pointing a finger toward me. "Teresa has been crying all afternoon. Daniel's panicked. Vendors are calling non-stop, and all because you couldn't handle a simple family decision with maturity." I raised an eyebrow, my voice calm. "A family decision. You mean uninviting your wife from your own brother's wedding while keeping her money?" His jaw clenched. "It wasn't like that. You're twisting it. Really. Because every vendor I spoke to said you told them I had stepped aside voluntarily, that I agreed to keep funding while disappearing quietly. Did I miss the part where you asked for my consent?" He shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar. "I was trying to prevent drama, Maggie. You know how emotional you get at family events. I didn't want Daniel's big day ruined by what?" I cut in sharply. "By my existence, by the fact that I refused to sit quietly while being erased." He exhaled sharply, pacing across the tile. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It was one wedding, one day. I did what was necessary for harmony. I set my teacup down with deliberate care, the porcelain clicking softly against the saucer. You lied to them. You lied about me. And you stole my money. That isn't harmony, Robert. That's betrayal." His expression hardened, the defensiveness giving way to anger. "You think just because you've built this business empire, you get to control everything, that money buys you the right to dictate every family decision." I stared at him, stunned by the venom in his tone. Control I gave quietly. I never once asked for recognition. I asked only to be included, to be treated with respect. And you repaid that with lies. He slammed his hand against the counter. "You see, this is exactly why I didn't want you there. This drama, this need to be the center of attention." The words cut deep, not because they were true, but because they revealed exactly how he saw me, not as a partner, but as a liability. I stood slowly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "For 15 years, I have supported you, your family, and every one of their needs. I wrote checks, I opened doors, I carried burdens they couldn't even name. And now you stand here accusing me of attention-seeking when all I asked for was honesty." His voice dropped quieter now, almost pleading. "Maggie, it was just a mistake. Poorly handled, sure. But my intentions were good. I wanted to keep the peace." I shook my head. "A mistake is forgetting to RSVP. A mistake is ordering the wrong flowers. This was calculated. You erased me, Robert. You lied in my name. And then you dared to call me dramatic when I uncovered the truth." He looked away, jaw tight, unable to meet my eyes. The silence that fell between us was heavier than any shouting match could have been. For the first time, I saw not the man I had married, but the man he had chosen to become, one who measured his worth not by loyalty, but by how effectively he could manipulate the people closest to him. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady, deliberate. "This was your last lie, Robert. I won't let you write me out of my own story. You thought you could use my generosity as your weapon. Now you'll see what happens when I decide to fight back." The room went silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Robert stood frozen, caught between anger and fear, realizing perhaps for the first time that he had underestimated me. The next morning, I arrived at Wallace Hospitality headquarters earlier than usual. The city was still waking, the desert sun barely cresting the horizon, painting the Phoenix skyline in muted gold. Inside my office, however, the lights were already on my legal team and senior managers seated around the long conference table. They knew something unusual was coming. The urgency in my voice last night had left no room for doubt. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, sliding a folder across the table, "our company holds controlling interest in every vendor tied to the Wallace Bennett wedding: Sunset Ridge Estate, Desert Bloom, Catering, Desert Palms, Resort. They all report to us directly or through subsidiaries." Heads nodded around the table. No one was surprised. I had spent years quietly building this network of ownership. But this morning those acquisitions took on new weight. "My husband has issued fraudulent instructions in my name," I continued. "He has attempted to alter contracts, reassign points of contact, and misrepresent financial authorizations. Effective immediately, I want every vendor notified that no changes are valid without my written approval." Marcus Chen. My most trusted advisor leaned forward, his voice steady. "Understood. But Maggie, what's your endgame here? Are you looking to cancel the event entirely or just reassert control?" I met his gaze, feeling the calm steel settle in my chest. Both, if necessary. The family thought they could erase me while enjoying the benefits of my resources. They forgot one crucial detail: those resources belong to me. And if they don't respect that, they don't get them. My legal counsel, Maria Alvarez, flipped through her notes. "Every contract includes clauses protecting the financial stakeholder from unauthorized changes. You're within your rights to terminate immediately. Vendors will follow your lead. They answer to this company, not to Robert." For the first time since the betrayal surfaced, I allowed myself a thin smile. The very empire Robert had dismissed as Maggie's little events business was now the fulcrum on which their entire wedding balanced. "Proceed with termination notices," I instructed, "and prepare statements making clear that unauthorized instructions from Robert Morrison carry no authority within this company." Maria raised a brow. "You want this documented formally? That will leave a paper trail." "Yes," I said firmly. "I want the record clear." He tried to erase me. Now I'll make it impossible for anyone to ignore who actually holds the power. By midday, the first ripples began. Diane from Desert Bloom called again, her voice carrying a mix of relief and astonishment. "Mrs. Wallace, we received your directive this morning. Thank you for clarifying." Frankly, our entire team was uncomfortable with the way Mr. Morrison handled things. Knowing the truth, it makes sense now. An hour later, Sunset Ridge called, then Desert Palms, each confirming that Robert's instructions were void. The vendors had chosen their loyalty quickly once they understood who signed their checks. But the most satisfying moment came when my assistant Hannah walked in holding a printout of the day's hospitality news brief. "You should see this," she said, handing it over. Across the industry newsletter's front page was a headline, "Wallace Hospitality Tightens Control on Regional Wedding Market." The article praised our decisive leadership, noting how vendors had reaffirmed loyalty to corporate directives over external interference. The family's betrayal, still private, had inadvertently turned into a public demonstration of my authority. That evening, Robert stormed into my office, his face pale with fury. "What the hell are you doing? Maggie vendors are calling Daniel saying everything's canceled. Do you realize the embarrassment you're causing?" I rose from my chair slowly, letting the silence stretch before I answered. "No, Robert. Do you realize the embarrassment you caused when you lied in my name? When you told the world I was too emotional, too unstable to attend my own family's wedding?" His mouth opened, then shut. For once he had no ready excuse. I stepped closer, my voice low but sharp. "You thought I was just a checkbook. You thought you could erase me, keep my money, and carry on. But what you forgot is that I don't just sign checks. I own the pen. I own the paper. And in this business, that means I own the future." For the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing the comfort, the lifestyle, the illusion of control he had built on the back of my empire. And in that moment, I knew the power had shifted. Monday morning at 10 a.m., the 32nd floor conference room of Wallace Hospitality gleamed under the desert sun. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened to a sweeping view of Phoenix, with the Camelback Mountains standing tall in the distance. The long mesquite wood table was polished to a mirror shine, surrounded by leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent. This was my domain, and today I had summoned the family here on my terms. Robert walked in first. Gone was his usual swagger. He glanced around at the walls lined with original Southwestern art and corporate awards, his hand trembling slightly as he set his briefcase on the table. Daniel and Laura came next, faces tight, trying to look composed. They chose seats on the left side, avoiding my gaze. Linda followed with her husband, and then two older relatives shuffled in, usually the loudest voices at family dinners, now silent as they took their seats. I stood at the head of the table, dressed in a navy suit, arms resting lightly on the chair back. No one spoke. The silence pressed down thick as the desert heat. "Thank you all for coming," I began, voice calm but edged with steel. "We're here to address what happened with Daniel and Laura's wedding and the fraudulent actions taken in my name." Robert jumped in immediately, his tone sharp. "Maggie, you're blowing this out of proportion. It was just a misunderstanding. I didn't give you permission to speak." My words cut through the air like glass. The room stilled, and Robert sank back into his chair, face flushing red. Turning to the others, I continued. "Over the last 2 weeks, at least 6 vendors contacted me directly. Each one told the same story Robert called them, claiming I had stepped aside voluntarily. He said I'd withdrawn from the guest list, but that my money would remain. Every single word was a lie." Linda leaned forward, her voice soft, practiced. "Maggie, you have to understand. Robert only wanted to avoid conflict. Weddings can be stressful, and stress doesn't justify forging my consent," I snapped. "You didn't just leave me out. You plotted to erase me completely while enjoying the benefits of my funding." Daniel's voice cracked slightly as he tried to sound steady. "Aunt Maggie, we really do appreciate your generosity. But Laura and I wanted something smaller, more intimate." I leaned over the table, my eyes locked on his. "Smaller, Daniel. Do you even realize every venue, every hotel, every catering service tied to your wedding belongs to Wallace Hospitality? My company, my empire. You tried to cut me out of something built on foundations I laid. And you thought I wouldn't notice?" The silence was deafening. Laura stared at the tablecloth. Robert bit his lip. "This isn't just family drama. I said, voice low and cold. "This is deception. Fraud. And I won't let it slide." I slid a folder across the table. "These are the only terms under which your wedding moves forward. A payment of $75,000 wired to the company account within 48 hours. Written apologies from Robert Daniel Linda, and both parents admitting exactly what they did." A public apology to me during the reception in front of every guest. Robert shot to his feet. "This is insane. I'll never sit down." My tone was sharp enough to slice through the air. He froze, then sank back into his chair, fists clenched. Daniel's shoulders slumped. His voice was small. "Aunt Maggie, $75,000. We don't have that kind of money." "You'll find it," I said evenly, looking directly at Laura, then at Robert. "Because if you don't, the wedding doesn't happen. And when your guests ask why, they'll hear the truth from me." Again, silence filled the room. The weight of it pressed on them until I could see the cracks forming in their expressions. No one laughed. No one dared to argue. For years, I had been the quiet woman at family dinners, the one overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. But here in my boardroom, surrounded by the proof of my power, that woman no longer existed. What they faced now was Margaret Wallace, CEO, owner, matriarch. "You have 48 hours, I said, gathering the papers into my briefcase. "Comply, or you explain to 60 guests why there is no wedding." I walked to the door without another word. Behind me, I left a table full of pale, shaken faces, finally realizing the game had changed. The silence from the boardroom lingered long after I left. I could almost feel the weight of it trailing behind me as I stepped into the private elevator and pressed the button for my office. 48 hours, that was all I had given them, and judging by their pale faces, they knew every minute would feel like a lifetime. By the time I returned to my desk, the phone was already buzzing. Hannah, my assistant, held out a note. Robert's mother called 3 times. Daniel left a voicemail. "And Robert is in the lobby demanding to see you." I shook my head. "He can wait." That evening, the storm truly began. First, Margaret, the matriarch of Robert's side, called. Her voice was sugar-coated, the kind she used when trying to put out family fires. "Maggie, darling, surely we can work this out without ultimatums. We all appreciate what you've done, but don't you think demanding money and public apologies is excessive?" "Excessive," I repeated, letting the word roll slowly off my tongue. "Margaret, what's excessive is erasing me while pocketing my $40,000. What's excessive is Robert lying to every vendor in town. I didn't create this mess. I'm simply correcting it." She sputtered, tried again, but I ended the call before she could wrap the betrayal in another layer of polite excuses. The next morning, Daniel himself called. His voice carried the weariness of someone who hadn't slept. "Aunt Maggie, please, you can't do this to us." Laura's devastated. Vendors are backing out and the family's furious. "I know Robert made mistakes, but punishing everyone, it feels cruel." I almost pitied him. Almost. "Daniel," I said gently, "actions have consequences. You were old enough to know better when you sat in those meetings deciding whether I belonged at your wedding. You chose silence over decency. That silence cost something. Now you get to decide how much it's worth." By noon, Laura reached out too, this time through email. Her words were polished, careful, almost corporate. She thanked me again for my generosity and pleaded for understanding. What struck me most wasn't her desperation, it was her refusal to admit any wrongdoing. To her, my conditions weren't justice, they were barriers to family happiness. I closed the email without replying. Meanwhile, Robert grew louder. He called repeatedly, left voicemails dripping with anger and blame. "You're destroying my brother's wedding. You're proving everyone right about your temper. You're acting like a dictator." But the one message that stood out came late that night. His voice was quieter, almost broken. "Maggie, if you go through with this, you'll ruin us. Not just the wedding, but the family. Don't you care what that does to us?" For the first time, I laughed. A short, bitter laugh. "Family," I whispered to the empty room. "You ruined that the moment you decided I was expendable." The second day brought whispers from the outside world. Vendors had begun spreading the story carefully, discreetly, but enough that I caught wind of it. The Wallace wedding might collapse. Margaret Wallace herself pulled the plug. Why betrayal? In the hospitality business, reputation is currency. And for once, the current ran entirely in my favor. Industry peers called to express admiration, competitors suddenly eager to talk partnership. What Robert's family thought was humiliation was in fact my elevation. Meanwhile, Robert's relatives scrambled. Margaret tried to pool money from savings and loans. Linda called around to cousins hinting at a family emergency fund. Daniel even approached his firm's partners about a short-term advance. Each attempt fell short of the looming $75,000. By the end of the second day, I received a courier envelope delivered to my office. Inside was a letter handwritten in Daniel's careful script. Aunt Maggie, we accept your terms. The money will be transferred tomorrow. Enclosed are signed apologies from each of us. We hope this gesture begins to repair the harm we've done. We leave the rest in your hands. Tucked behind the letter were 5 separate notes. Robert's the most begrudging, Margaret's defensive but polished, Linda's shaky, Laura's overly formal. Only Daniel's felt genuine. I read them once, then slid them back into the envelope. The transfer hit my account the next morning. $75,000, nearly double the original gift they thought they could steal. The decision had been made. That night, as I stood on my balcony watching the desert sky fade into violet dusk, I let the cool air wash over me. I had forced them to choose, and they had chosen survival. But it wasn't about the money or even the apologies. It was about recognition. For the first time, they couldn't ignore who I was or what I had built. They had treated me like a shadow. Now they knew I was the foundation. And without me, everything crumbled. 4 weeks later, the desert evening settled over Canyon Vista Lodge, a property I had acquired years ago and one of my favorites for its quiet elegance. Unlike the sprawling resorts and luxury estates in our portfolio, this lodge sat tucked against the Arizona foothills, framed by ridges that blushed purple as the sun went down. I had chosen it deliberately. It was intimate, dignified, impossible to mistake for a spectacle. Gone was the original guest list of 60 bloated with cousins, coworkers, and friends of friends. In its place stood 40 carefully selected invitations. The chatter of unnecessary acquaintances had been stripped away. For once, people who truly mattered filled the seats. It was not a lavish show. It was a wedding that could breathe. The decor reflected that shift. No towering floral arrangements meant to impress. Instead, clusters of desert wildflowers in low stone vases rested along tables made from reclaimed wood. Lanterns cast warm pools of light across the patio. The ceremony arch was simple hand-carved beams draped with linen framed by the mountains themselves. Nature did the decorating better than money ever could. Inside the kitchen, the catering team I'd trained personally worked like a seasoned orchestra. Rosemary roasted chicken, citrus-glazed salmon haricots, verts tossed with almonds, warm bread baked on-site. Dessert would be lemon tarts made from the same recipe Thomas and I had once sold in our tiny roadside diner decades ago. That memory still lived in my bones, and tonight it seemed right to serve something born of both struggle and love. I arrived early, dressed in a navy gown I had worn before. Nothing new, nothing designed to dazzle. The point of this evening was not me, though my presence carried a weight it hadn't before. Hannah walked beside me, clipboard in hand. Vendors checked in, she reported. Seating confirmed. Photographer knows you'll be reviewing all images before release. Everyone's on time. Good, I said, my voice calm. Let's keep it that way. Guests trickled in with coats pulled tight against the desert chill. Some looked nervous, others curious, many avoiding my gaze. A few offered tentative smiles as though testing whether bridges could still be built. I returned each one politely, but without promises. Forgiveness is not granted in a single evening, it is earned over time. Robert stood near the fireplace, shoulders tense in a suit too crisp for the weariness etched on his face. He glanced at me once, but quickly looked away. For years he had treated me like an accessory. Tonight he was the accessory, an awkward ornament in a story no longer under his control. Daniel approached me before the ceremony began, alone. No Laura at his side, no family behind him. Just a young man preparing to take vows. Aunt Maggie. He began, voice steadier than I expected. I need to say something before the ceremony. I was wrong, not just about the wedding, about everything. Every time I stayed quiet when I should have spoken, every time I let others decide what was fair to you, I was a coward. I'm sorry. I studied his face, noting the sleeplessness around his eyes, the strain of weeks spent balancing love and family politics. For the first time, I saw not just Robert's nephew, but a man trying to stand taller than his mistakes. You'll have a microphone later, I told him. Use it well. The ceremony began at sunset. Guests sat in a semicircle, so no one was hidden in the back, no one elevated in the front. A lone cellist played Shenandoah. The officiant, a friend of Laura's family, kept his words short. He spoke not of destiny or fairy tales, but of ordinary promises, patience, honesty, choosing kindness on the dull days when no one is watching. When Daniel and Laura exchanged vows, their hands trembled but their words held. When they kissed, the room didn't erupt in cheers, it exhaled a collective breath released after weeks of tension. Dinner followed. The great hall glowed with lantern light as people gathered at long tables. Plates arrived hot. Conversation flowed, and for once I watched a Wallace family event unfold without the undertone of politics or competition. People were quieter, more present. It felt almost human again. After dessert, Daniel rose with his glass and asked for the microphone. His notes stayed folded in his pocket. "Tonight exists," he said, "because someone we wronged chose not to abandon us." His eyes met mine. "Aunt Maggie, you gave generously when we asked for nothing. And when we repaid you with disrespect, you didn't destroy us. You demanded we learn. I am sorry for my silence. Sorry for calling it family peace when it was just avoidance. And I'm grateful you forced us to tell the truth here in front of everyone." Laura stood next, voice trembling. "Margaret, I owe you an apology." I stayed quiet when I should have asked questions. I let others speak for me, and that silence became betrayal. I want to build a marriage that honors people, not appearances. Thank you for giving us that chance. The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was sustained and genuine. Then Robert unexpectedly stepped forward. He didn't take the mic. He didn't rehearse. His voice was rough. "I lied," he admitted. "I lied about Maggie stepping aside. I lied to the vendors. I lied to all of you. I told myself it was for peace, but it was for control. I'm sorry. It wasn't absolution. But it was truth, and truth has its own gravity." I nodded once, nothing more. Music rose and couples drifted to the dance floor. I stayed seated, content to observe. Guests came in small waves, some to thank me, some to confess they hadn't realized the scope of what I'd built. I accepted the gratitude, ignored the confessions. Recognition isn't currency I chase. Near the end of the night, Daniel handed me a sealed envelope. "It's not money," he said, almost shy. Inside was a letter on his firm's letterhead, the Wallace Scholarship for Hospitality Management, an annual fund for local students endowed in my name. Modest but meaningful. That, I told him, folding it carefully, is a good beginning. Later, as I stepped outside, the mountains were dark against a scatter of stars. The desert air was cold and bracing. Hannah joined me, coat tight around her shoulders. "You did it," she said softly. "No," I answered. "They did. I just set the terms." She smiled. "That's leadership." Through the lodge's windows, I watched Laura laughing with her mother Daniel, thanking guests, Robert standing quietly in the corner. The evening wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and sometimes honesty is the most beautiful thing you can serve at a wedding. 3 months after Daniel and Laura's wedding, the desert sun fell across the glass facade of Wallace Hospitality's new headquarters in Scottsdale. The building stood like a monument to everything I had built, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting light across the valley, conference rooms, alive with new contracts and hallways, humming with the quiet determination of people who respected the name on the door. My name. The family scandal had become a story told in hushed tones across the hospitality industry. Competitors called it a cautionary tale. Vendors treated it as proof that loyalty mattered. Journalists spun it into headlines about underestimated women rising into their true strength. I didn't have to explain anything. The facts had already spoken. Robert and his family had tried to erase me, and instead they erased the illusions they'd lived under for years. At night, I sometimes replayed the quiet moments, the family dinners, where my contributions were ignored, the patronizing smiles, when I was introduced as just helping with events, the years of making myself smaller, so others could feel bigger. 15 years of that pattern had almost convinced me it was normal, until betrayal exposed the truth. And yet I wasn't left with bitterness. The Bible says in Galatians 6:7, "Do not be deceived, God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows." Those words echoed through me more clearly now than ever before. Robert sowed deception. He reaped loss. His family sowed disrespect. They reaped humiliation. But what I had sown, hard work, perseverance, integrity, had blossomed into respect, influence, and freedom. That was not coincidence. That was truth. When Robert finally signed the divorce papers, he looked more tired than angry. His last words to me were, "You'll regret walking away." But regret is reserved for those who cling to what destroys them. I walked into a new life carrying only what had value, my dignity, my company, my faith, that God's justice had always been at work even when I couldn't see it. The family eventually quieted down. Margaret stopped calling. Linda sent one last apology letter, thin and perfunctory, and then nothing. Daniel and Laura, though, surprised me. They honored their promise about the scholarship fund, launching it at a small ceremony where hospitality students and their parents shook my hand with tears in their eyes. That moment meant more to me than all the hollow apologies stacked together. It proved that redemption was possible not through words but through changed behavior. And I discovered a peace I hadn't known in years. Living alone in my Scottsdale home, I learned that solitude can be a sanctuary. The silence was no longer the absence of love, but the presence of clarity. I no longer had to shrink myself for the comfort of people who treated my generosity like weakness. As I sat one evening on the balcony with a glass of wine, I thought about how this story would sound to someone outside. Was it revenge? Was it justice? Was it simply the natural outcome of choices made and truths revealed? Perhaps all three. But above all, it was proof of that biblical principle, you reap what you sow. That's why I believe stories like mine resonate, because they aren't just about betrayal and payback, they are about truth surfacing, dignity restored, and strength revealed at exactly the moment it's needed. They are what people search for when they look up true revenge stories, not cruelty, but consequence, not pettiness, but principle. And now to you, the listener, the viewer, the person sitting somewhere with your own scars from being underestimated or betrayed, I want to leave you with this. You are not invisible. You are not just someone else's accessory or checkbook or afterthought. You were created with worth, and your worth is not determined by those who fail to see it. As the Bible reminds us, every seed planted bears fruit in time. If you keep sowing faithfulness, courage, and truth, you will reap a harvest that no betrayal can take away. Yes, people may mock you, dismiss you, or try to use you. They may strip away invitations, erase your name, or tell lies about your place in the family, but their actions do not define your destiny. Only God does, and His justice has a way of bringing things full circle in ways no one can predict, but everyone must respect. So if you are listening now, holding back tears because someone tried to make you small, remember this: your quiet strength is not weakness, it is preparation. One day, like me, you may find yourself standing in a room where every eye finally sees what God saw all along, that you were the foundation holding everything together. And when that moment comes, don't be afraid to set terms. Don't be afraid to require respect. Don't be afraid to walk away from those who sow deception, because their harvest will come whether you watch it or not. What matters is that you stay faithful. Keep planting what is good, and never forget the truth of Galatians 6:7. Because in the end, revenge is not about rage, it is about restoration. It is about dignity being put back in its rightful place. It is about seeing lies collapse under their own weight while truth rises steady like the desert sun that cannot be hidden. So tonight, as this story closes, I ask you, what seeds are you planting, and what harvest are you preparing to reap? If this story spoke to you, if you saw yourself in my journey, don't keep it to yourself. share it with someone who needs the reminder. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment below, and join us for more stories that prove strength and justice still have a voice in this world. Because these are not just stories of betrayal. These are true revenge stories where dignity wins truth, speaks louder than lies, and God's justice has the final word.